يا أهل الجنة إن ربكم تبارك وتعالى يستزيركم فحي على زيارته.
The only difference, I'm only repeating this just for those that missed it, is for our madhab, when someone does tayammum over a cast or a plaster, there's a specific condition we need to be very careful about. We said that if the plaster was put on whilst one had wudu, and then someone does tayammum over it, there's no problem with this whatsoever. Yeah, and you do not need to repeat the prayers. But if one has a plaster or a cast put on a place of tayammum or wudu, so for example someone breaks their arm, if you have a plaster put on there or a cast whilst you don't have wudu, every salah that you pray whilst having done tayammum over it, you need to repeat. So say you had you broke your arm and you had a cast put on in A&E and you did not have wudu, and you had that cast on for 6 weeks. So, and you cannot remove this cast. And every wudu and every salah that you prayed whilst you had that cast on, according to our madhab, it needs to be repeated. But according to other madhahib, it's not a must. I just thought I would mention that from the beginning, inshallah. Khair. Now, so, Najasa. The Musannif, rahimahullah, he brings the next topic as Najasa. And I know we did touch a bit on it earlier on, but as the Musannif rahimahullah has brought it closer to the end, I thought it's only correct that we touch on it again. So, Bismillah. First of all, Najasa, linguistically, it means to be impure. Okay, let me just get this up. So, Najasa means to be impure. Just impure. So, anything that's filthy, anything that's dirty will be classed as najis. But shar'an, according to Sharia, is, in short, is anything that prevents the validity of salah. Okay, anything that prevents the validity of salah will be classed as najis in Sharia. And why it's important to actually make this clear or clarify this difference is that, for example, phlegm or saliva or bogies or snot, all of these they're dirty, right? But if someone had a bogey on his clothes, for example, or on his arm, will that make their salah invalid? No. So it's very important to know the difference here. Now, so it's everything that prevents the validity of salah. This is what it will be shar'an. Next, what the Musannif rahimahullah he says with regards to Najasa. So we'll quickly read the Arabic before reading the English. So read the Arabic. Naam. So the Musannif rahimahullah, he says, فصل وكل مائع خرج من السبيلين نجس إلا المني. So that's the first thing. First sentence. Every type of fluid that comes out of the private parts is najis. So every type of fluid, we went through quite a few. If you can remember, we spoke about madi, wadi, urine, blood, of course, if it's from a woman, and so on. But the Musannif, he says, illa al-mani, except for semen. So semen, mani, is not impure. In and of itself, semen is not impure. Were any of you here when we discussed that? Were you here? Do you remember what it was? What was the reason? Can anyone remind me of the reason as to why mani is not impure? I think I gave about 2 reasons as to why. Anyone on Zoom? Okay, khair. People probably forgotten. So we said money, one of the reasons we mentioned was that, of course, life comes out of al-mani, so, and the human being is pure. And obviously we know the human being, the beginning stage is from the semen, so of course they are pure. And as we know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us that the believer does not become impure. So it's from that stage and so on. And we actually spoke about as to why mani does not break wudu as well. But inshallah we'll not touch up on that. Now with regards to mani, it being pure, whether it's from animals, humans, regardless, it will remain pure. And then the Musannif rahimahullah, he says, وغسل جميع الأبوال والأوراث واجب إلا بول الصبي الذي لم يأكل الطعام فإنه يطهر برش الماء عليه. So the Musannif rahimahullah, he says that washing all urine or all dung is obligatory. So any of these filth that you have on your clothes and so on, it is a must to wash it, except for the urine of a child. And over here, so the Musannif, he says, illa sabi. Now, my translation there is wrong. So of a child, meaning a baby boy. This does not include baby girls. Okay, it does not include baby boys. So except the urine of a child who has not eaten food, or it is only purified by sprinkling water onto it. Now with regards to this, we did mention the hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he was brought a young boy, he had him on his lap, and after the boy urinating on him, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam just sprinkled water over it. Yeah? And due to that hadith and the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is agreed upon by all the scholars. He then says, rahimahullah, وَلَا يُعْفَى عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِنَ النَّجَاسَاتِ إِلَّا الْيَسِيرَ مِنَ الدَّمِ وَالْقَيْحِ وَمَا لَا نَفْسَ لَهُ سَائِلَةٌ إِذَا وَقَعَ فِي الْإِنَاءِ وَمَاتَ فِيهِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ. So here, rahimahullah, he says, so reading from the bottom part, nothing from the impurities which we have just mentioned is forgiven, meaning there's no forgiven amount on it. So for example, if you have just a small amount of dung on your garments, you're going to have to wash it. Just a small amount of urine, you have to wash it, and so on. And inshallah we'll get into more detail when we get to the conditions of salah. That's where the Musannif talks deeper into it. He says, except for a little bit of blood and pus. And from this, it's only from the individual. Okay, so only a bit of blood from yourself and so on, this will be an excusable amount. And from that, inshallah, we'll talk more on it after. And then he says, and whatever does not have, he says liquid breath but flowing blood. So anything that does not have flowing blood, if it falls into a vessel and it dies in it, it does not make the drink or whatever impure, or the water impure. So only that much is excused in terms of impurities, because we know every animal and so on that passes away or that dies, they will be classed as impure, except for any insects. So it's normally insects, of course, that don't have flowing blood. And we know there's that famous hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, when a fly falls into your drink, then don't take it out straight away. Push it all in and then take it out. Because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, because on the wings of this fly, on one of the wings there is poison, and one of the wings there is cure, there is shifa. So put it in, and of course inshallah the cure will override the poison, and it will be good for the for the one drinking. It won't be a problem, and it will not make the water najis. Okay. Yeah, any fly. Any fly. طيب. So we mentioned that there. And then he says, rahimahullah, وَالْحَيَوَانُ كُلُّهُ. He says, rahimahullah, وَالْحَيَوَانُ كُلُّهُ طَاهِرٌ إِلَّا الْكَلْبَ وَالْخِنْزِيرَ وَمَا تَوَلَّدَ مِنْهُمَا أَوْ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا. So he makes it very clear here, the Musannif, rahimahullah, he says that all animals are pure. All animals are pure except for the dog or the pigs or their offspring. So any one of their offspring. Okay, and it's very important here to mention any one of their offsprings, because we live in a time right now where these scientists and so on, they try and breed anything and everything together. So they might breed a dog and a pure animal. I don't know, a dog and a horse and so on. The horse is pure, but the dog is not. So whatever offspring comes from there, the dog will make it impure. So any one of their offsprings. And we know there's famous hadith which we touched on, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if a dog licks any one of your utensils or so on, you should wash it 7 times, and once with soil. Inshallah, we'll touch more on that. And and there's one brother, if I can remember, I think it was Hassan, you asked me quite a long time ago with regards to, we have the concept, or we have the dalil for the dogs. What is the dalil for the pig being najis and so on? And the dalil for that is the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where it says, أو لحم خنزير, or the meat of the khinzir. Now whether dead or alive, the whole body is najis. So inshallah, I hope that answers the question. طيب. So and then here rahimahullah, he says والميتة كلها نجسة إلا السمك والجراد والآدمي. So here, rahimahullah, he says all dead animals are impure except for fish, locusts, and human beings. And we touched on, of course, if you can remember, with regards to the human beings, we said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. So we have honored the children of Adam and so on. And where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in many narrations, he mentions that the Adami, so the believer, he does not become najis. Okay, and because of this, even when dead, the human body is not classed as najis. And he also mentions fish. Yes, somebody is asking, does this include foxes too? Yes. All dead animals. Even if it's an animal that you can eat, if it dies without being slaughtered according to Sharia, it will become najis. Okay? Unless it's been slaughtered according to Sharia, it will become najis. So whatever it may be, chicken is halal, goat are halal, and so on. That's why for those who are able, if you see an animal that you are allowed to eat, if it's passing away and so on, you quickly go and slaughter it according to Sharia. And fish, we mentioned, I think, a couple of weeks ago as well, that according to the Shafi'iyya, fish and all sea life and so on, they are halal, regardless whether they come out alive or dead. They are alive, but according to Ahnaf, if you can remember, we mentioned that for them, the dead fish, the fish which has died by itself in the water, that's not halal. But obviously, how are you going to find that out? Allah knows best. When people go fishing, they just take the whole lot. You don't know when or how the fish has died. But that is according to the Ahnaf. So, and then yes, he says, ويغسل الإناء من ولوغ الكلب والخنزير 7 مرات إحداهن بتراب. Yes, إحداهن بتراب ويغسل من سائر النجاسات مرة تأتي عليه والثلاث أفضل. So rahimahullah, he says that the vessel is washed from the licking of the dog or the pig, we said 7 times, and once with soil, and it's preferred that it is washed with soil right at the beginning, because obviously the water that's to come after is going to remove the effects of the soil and so on as well. And then he rahimahullah, so he says all other impurities can be washed once. So it's sufficient to wash every other impurity. So if you've got urine, you've got dung and so on your clothes, these can be washed just once. Okay, tayyib. So those are pretty straightforward. Next here, rahimahullah, he says, so in this part he mentions or speaks about things that are purified through change. So he, rahimahullah, he says, وَإِذَا تَخَلَّلَتِ الْخَمْرَةُ بِنَفْسِهَا طَهُرَتْ وَإِن تَخَلَّلَتْ بِطَرْحِ شَيْءٍ فِيهَا لَمْ تَطْهُرْ. Okay, so he, rahimahullah, he says, when alcohol changes to vinegar by itself, it is pure. Vinegar becomes halal. But if it is changed by mixing it with something else, it will remain impure. So if someone tries to make, for example, vinegar by taking actual wine and alcohol and mixing it with stuff, that vinegar becomes impure. It's not halal to eat it. Okay? And we know, generally speaking, obviously when vinegar is made, it's normally alcohol or wine that's been left for so long, and then it turns into vinegar. That's how vinegar is, real vinegar is actually made. From alcohol, yes. From alcohol it becomes vinegar, and it becomes halal to eat. Now with this, in this ruling, there is the fiqhi ruling or the principle which is called al-istihālah, meaning to change. When something changes from one thing to another. And the main discussion on these, or the main thing that people bring about onto this, is with regards to gelatin. Yeah, gelatin. Is it halal? Is it not? Or especially, for example, Haribos. People buy Haribos right now, or anything that has gelatin, and it's not halal gelatin, and they take it from some of the ulama that say the process of making sweets or so on with gelatin, the fat itself changes to something else, and so it completely evaporates. But according to scientists, that's not the case. The gelatin still remains in there, which renders whatever you're having haram. Because we know that we do have halal gelatin, which, of course, the Muslim companies and so on use. And yeah, it's not a natural process. That's the thing. That's another thing, where it's changed by adding things and so on. It's not a natural process. Yeah, they add so much to try and change it. That's why we have halal gelatin that can be used or easily sourced now. Alhamdulillah, especially for us over here, it's so easy to find halal gelatin. Okay, now, so he said, rahimahullah, that, okay, at the top we said everything can be washed once, but it is preferred that things are washed 3 times. Tayyib. Next, with najasa, if you can remember, we said that there were different types of najasa. So there was the thick, heavy, ayniyah, and so on. So we said najasa, first of all, we have hukmiyah and ayniyah. So hukmiyah is that, so this is kind of just a refresher. Hukmiyah is that najasa or that filth which cannot be seen. So the color, the taste, or the smell are not visible. Okay, these are not visible at all. And an example for that is dried up urine. Sometimes it's easy to see, sometimes it's not. So I mean, for example, if you have to go to a public toilet, dried up urine, I would say 8 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times you'll see it. If it's, even though it's dried up and it's on the toilet seat, you'll see it. But for example, if it's to go on your clothes, once it dries up, that's it. Yeah, and the ruling for this is, if you cannot see where the impurity is on the garment, then you have to wash the whole thing. Yeah, it's not sufficient to just remove or just to wipe where you think the najasa is and so on. You have to wash the whole garment. And with regards to ayniyah, we said that there were 3 types. So there is mukhaffafa, which is the light impurities, And then you have mutawassita, which is the in between. And then you have mughallada, which is the heavy. So we said, with regards to light, what we just discussed above, the baby boy who has had only breast milk, so no food and so on, up to the age of 2, their urine is only cleaned, you can clean it just by sprinkling water over it. This is sufficient. Yeah, it's sufficient to do so. And this will fall under the light impurity because, of course, you don't have to soak the garment and rub it and wash it 7 times and so on. And then you have that which is in between. So if we just do, heavy impurity is that of dogs, pigs, and their offspring. So dogs, pigs, and their offspring. And every other najasa, every other najis will fall into the in-between, the mutawassita. Okay, so every other najis will fall into this category, and so it will either, now this najasa will either be hukmiya or ayniya. And some of the ulama, they say it's called hukmiya because the hukum of it being najis is given to it even though you cannot see it. That's why it's called hukmiya. It's najis just as per the ruling, and then ayniya is just something that's visible. If you could see the color, the smell, or taste, there's a taste to it, then these 3 must be removed. They must be removed. But, say for example, you've got such impurity on your garments. Normally you'll see a lot of the sisters, they experience this most, where the blood, for example, they clean their garment so many times, but it does not come off. As long as the smell and the taste is removed, the color is not a problem. Because obviously it's a stain and there's not much that can be done. Okay. Someone just sent a message. It's the rule of thumb for something to be halal based on naturally processed changes as opposed to physical chemical change. So someone asked a question. So is the rule of thumb for something to be halal based on naturally processed changes as opposed to physical or chemical change? No, that's not always the case. So it's anything najis, for it to become pure, there's different ways of purifying. For example, we mentioned that all dead animals, their skin can be purified. Yeah, so a dead animal we just mentioned before is najis, correct? We said all dead animals are najis, all of them. So, for example, a goat, but the skin can still be purified, and the only way to purify it will be through chemicals and water and so on. So depending on the najasa, the cleaning process will differ according to that. So I hope that answers the question, inshallah. With regards to najasa, there is different ways of purifying. So it's only those things which we have nas of. So only those things which we have nas of. So for example, alcohol, only through change by itself, it becomes halal, because there is a hadith which is narrated in Abu Dawood, where to the nearest meaning, one of the companions, Abu Talha, if I can remember correctly, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and presented him with alcohol and saying that, I made this, or I changed it. And the Prophet ﷺ told him to throw it away, meaning don't use it, to prove that it is najis. I hope that answers the question, inshallah. It's not really a rule of thumb with regards to halal or impurities becoming pure. Depends on what the thing is. So over here, specific with regards to gelatin and so on, as long as there's a complete change by itself, because it's from the animal, then inshallah that will be halal. Okay, tayyib. So we said, and then in between, everything else that comes in between will be classed as mutawassita, and in order to clean it, you have to remove all of its traces. unless it's difficult to, which we just gave the example of. Yes, the woman, for example. Khair. And before we get on to, inshallah, the next topic, just to mention one or two things. When doing wudu, for example, or if you've got a bucket of water and dirty water falls into that, of course, if it's less than kullatain, this impure water, of course, the water will become impure. The water in the bucket will also be impure. But if you're doing wudu, for example, and a few drops of water go into the pot and the likes, then there's nothing wrong with that. It does not make the water impure. And then the next chapter, the Musannif, he mentions, inshallah, we'll just touch a bit on it, is the chapter of Haze. Okay, chapter of Haze. And this is as important, of course, for the sisters is more important, but it is as important for the brothers because we need to educate our sisters at home. I'm sure everyone here has a sister, a daughter, a mother, or whatever, or a wife that we can educate. Now, Haze is a very, I can say, complicated topic, because it is one of those chapters in which there is no hard and fast rule for every single person. Rules will change, or the hukum will change from person to person, depending on their haze and how they're bleeding and so on. But there are a few things which are hard and fast, which inshallah we will touch on. Inshallah will talk about, okay, let's start this. So number one, lughatan, linguistically, haze means to flow. It's that simple. So haze means to flow, and anything can flow, whether it's water and the likes. Now shar'an, it means blood which flows from a woman as a matter of health, or due to health, without the cause of childbirth. Okay, so blood which a woman emits without any cause, meaning without any illness or any reason being childbirth and so on. And we know that this blood comes from the womb. And that's why there is ikhtilaf between the scholars. Some say when one is pregnant, can they get haze? The blood that comes out, will it be classed as haze or not? And according to our madhab, it will be classed as haze. Even though there is ikhtilaf in the madhab in itself, but the most correct opinion in the madhab is even a pregnant woman can have haze. But according to the majority, they say it's not possible. Even scientifically, they say it's not possible, because once the womb or the egg has ovulated, it's not possible to bleed. Not because it's being used up. So anyway, shar'an is blood which flows from a healthy woman, in days or without any cause for it. Now, the Musannif rahimahullah, he says, خرج من الفرج ثلاثة دماء. So he rahimahullah, he lists down, so دم الحيض والنفاس والاستحاضة. So he says rahimahullah, women emit 3 types of blood. Okay, 3 types of blood. Number 1, menstrual bleeding, which is the normal one that we all know. And then number 2 is damun nifas. Damun nifas is postnatal bleeding. Yeah, and we'll explain it inshallah. Number 3 is istihadha. Some call it chronic bleeding, some say irregular and so on. Inshallah, in today's lesson we'll only touch on the menstrual and damun nifas, because damun istihadha is probably the most complicated or the most confusing of the 3. Inshallah, next week I'll bring in a few scenarios and so on that we can understand. So Damul Hayd, the Musannif rahimahullah, he explains it. So he says, فَالْحَيْضُ هُوَ الدَّمُ الْخَارِجُ مِنْ فَرْجِ الْمَرْأَةِ عَلَى سَبِيلِ الصِّحَّةِ مِنْ غَيْرِ سَبَبِ الْوِلَادَةِ. So he says, and then وَلَوْنُهُ, okay, I'll read that after. So he says, rahimahullah, Hayd, it is blood that flows from a woman as a matter of health without the cause of childbirth, which we just explained in the beginning. And then he says, وَلَوْنُهُ, Now this is important. So he says, وَلَوْنُهُ أَسْوَدُ مُحْتَدِمٌ لَذَّاعٌ. So he says, rahimahullah, and its color is dark, very dark red, so much so that it can look black. It's hot, and it has a smell. Okay, so these are the characteristics of Haze that people need to know. There was someone who's asked a question in the case. Inshallah, I'll have a look at the questions after. So the Musannif rahimahullah, he says the description of Haze is that it is dark in color, it is hot, and it has a smell. And of course, obviously the sisters will understand this more. And it's very important for us to know the qualities of Haze, because we said that the woman has 3 types of bleeding. So they need to be able to differentiate between what is what. And because the rulings will change. And then here, rahimahullah, he says, وَالنِّفَاسِ So دم النفاس he explains now. So وَالنِّفَاسُ هُوَ الدَّمُ الْخَارِجُ عَقِبَ الْوِلَادَةِ وَالْإِسْتِحَاضَةُ هُوَ الْخَارِجُ فِي غَيْرِ أَيَّامِ الْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ. So he says, النِّفَاس is blood which flows after childbirth. So it's important that we understand that it is after childbirth, meaning once the full baby is born, the blood that follows after that is going to be damun nifas. And according to us, if the woman in labor and so on, if she bleeds before or during giving birth, this is not classed as nifas. This will be classed as istihādah and so on. Okay, so it's very important that we know that. And then he says, an istihādah, it is blood which comes out on days other than those of menstruation or postnatal bleeding. So if a woman experiences bleeding on days other than after she's given birth or menstruation days, then this will be known as istihādah. Like we said, some call it chronic bleeding, some say irregular bleeding, and so on. And then he, rahimahullah, he says, now this is important as well, وَأَقَلُّ الْحَيْضِ يَوْمٌ وَلَيْلَةٌ وَأَكْثَرُهُ 15 يَوْمًا. Yes. وَغَالِبُهُ 6 أو 7. So we'll quickly just mention that. Oops, got the wrong way. So Hayd, the minimum, so we'll read the whole Arabic inshallah, and then we'll translate it. And then so here rahimahullah, he says, وَأَقَلُّ النِّفَاسِ لَحْظَةٌ وَأَكْثَرُهُ 60 يَوْمًا وَغَالِبُهُ 40 يَوْمًا. So he, rahimahullah, he says, so the minimum duration for Hayd is 1 day and 1 night. So in short, 24 hours. 24 hours is the minimum. So 24 hours of bleeding is the minimum for one to be classed as to be in Hayd. And the maximum is 15 days. Now when we say 24 hours, we don't mean the woman has to constantly be bleeding for 24 hours. That's not the case. So, and what is meant by this is, for example, if a woman, just for purposes of ease, if a woman sees blood 12 a.m. in the morning, and then she's pure for about 3-4 hours, she sees blood again after 8 hours, and so on, and this bleeding lasts until the next day, 12 a.m., she will be classed to have entered into her Hayd. And the maximum days of bleeding is 15 days. So anything outside of this window will be classed as istihādah. Yeah, so say for example a woman, she sees blood. Every day she could see she's spotting. Every day she's seeing something. That will go on for 15 days, and anything after that will be classed as istihādah. And the ruling will change. Okay? And we'll see why inshallah at the end, or I'll explain why at the end. And then we mentioned, so an-nifas, so postnatal bleeding, the minimum duration for one to be classed in as a woman who is experiencing damun nifas is just a moment. Because you'll have some women, they'll give birth, they'll bleed probably for like 2 or 3 minutes, and that's it. So that's the bare minimum. But the maximum is 60 days. Okay, maximum is 60 days, meaning if they still carry on bleeding after that, it will either be menstruation or it will be istihada. We'll need to look into it. And usually it is 40 days. Okay, usually it is 40 days. Now with regards to... Okay, I think I missed a point. Okay, yeah, I got in the wrong order. So for Hayd, normally, of course, women, the bleeding will change, it will differ depending on the location, where they are, temperature, food they eat, and so on. Normal women bleeds for 6 to 7 days. This is the normal, usual, you could say, Hayd period. Some I know have less, 3-4 days, some have even longer. They bleed well past 15 days, some are non-stop. I've had cases where women have been bleeding 6 months, 7 months non-stop, just spotting all the time. So the ruling changes with them. Okay, now.
So you know, there's this threshold of 7 days and 40 days, especially with the postnatal bleeding after you give birth. Is it also important to know that, obviously, if a woman realizes that she's stopped bleeding before that, then she's pregnant and she's blood clots?
Yes, so it's very important for women to know and... Yeah, definitely, women should not rely. That's why I said, like with Hayd, it's so... It differs from person to person. Yeah, so the rulings will be different. You can't just sit and say, 7 days, my period must be finished. That's not the case. Like I said, there's women who will bleed, and when they bleed, they see the characteristics of the Hayd. So the description which you gave before is dark in color, it's hot, and it has a smell. And normally this is followed by with pains as well. You'll see women, they have period pains and so on. But some don't even have any pain. They don't experience any pain. That's why just the color or the description which we gave is very important for them to know. So they need to, of course, pay close attention to the Hayd itself. And of course, this is on an individual basis, like we mentioned. We can't just put the same rule for everyone. Yeah? Okay, khair. So that was... Naam. So now the Musannif, rahimahullah, he mentions... Okay, yes. Yeah, وَأَقَلُّ زَمَنٍ تَحِيضُ فِيهِ الْمَرْأَةُ 9 سِنِينَ. We'll read the Arabic, inshallah. 9 سِنِينَ وَأَقَلُّ الْحَمْلِ 6 أَشْهُرٍ وَأَكْثَرُهُ 4 سِنِينَ وَغَالِبُهُ 9 أَشْهُرٍ. So here, rahimahullah, he mentions, I think, and we're coming close to the end over here. So here, rahimahullah, he mentions, so he says the minimum period of purity between 2 menses is 15 days. And there is no limit to the maximum. Okay, very important that we understand this. The minimum period of purity between 2 menses has to be 15 days. So, for example, in 1 month, say there's 30 days. And a woman bleeds for 7 days, let's say. Yeah, 7 days. That is her normal Hayd period. So she bleeds for these 7 days. So from there until, of course, if she doesn't have any regular bleeding, from there until, if she sees blood, for example, after 10 days, that will not be classed as Hayd, because from the 7th onwards, there has to be 15 days of purity in between. Okay, and any bleeding that occurs within will be classed as istihada. So for example, someone bleeds for 15 days. So half of the month she will be classed to be on Hayd, and half of the month she will be classed to be pure. So I'll give a better example actually, that we'll understand. So we said the maximum period of bleeding is how many days? For someone to be on Hayd, what was the maximum we just mentioned? That's the normal amount. No, 15 days for Hayd. Damun nifas. So someone just commented here, 15 days. So damun nifas, postnatal bleeding, maximum is 60 days. So with Hayd, maximum bleeding is 15 days. So anything that comes after that will be classed as istihada, correct? So let's say someone bleeds for 15 days. Okay? That is the max. So that is the maximum time that one can bleed. And then after, let's say, 10 days, after 10 days they start to bleed again. So on the 15th they're bleeding, and then on the 25th of the month they see blood again. This will be classed as istihādah, because there's no 15 days between the previous Haze and the next one. Yeah, I hope that's clear. Inshallah, naam.
So what if you stop bleeding on the 13th, and the 14th there's no blood, but the 15th there is?
Yeah, see, that's a good question. That will still be classed as Haze. So if someone bleeds for 13 days, they don't see blood the next day, and then on the 15th day they see blood again, there is a very high possibility that this could be classed as Haze, because it's still within the 15-day window. And obviously, this will be... Okay, someone saying they cannot hear. Did I? I muted. Wow. Sorry, wait. Okay, what was the last thing that you lot heard? Okay, so someone must have heard my question on 15, on the maximum duration, so I'll take it as you got to there. So I'll just repeat myself now. So the maximum period between of cleanliness between two periods, two menses, has to be 15 days. So I gave the example. I said if someone bleeds for 15 days, and then after 10 days they see blood again, that blood will be classed as istihādah, because the next bleeding that they see has to be after 15 days for it to be classed as Haze. Okay? And then this is why there's that one hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions to the nearest meaning that, of course, can't you see that, obviously there's a lot of discussion with regards to it, where he ﷺ, he said that the women are naqisat. Basically there's a bit of, I'm just trying to look for the correct term to use. We'll just use the direct translation for now, but it's deficient. Yeah, deficient in ibadah. So, and when he was asked how or why, he said, don't you see that they don't fast for half of the month, or they don't pray for half of the month, and so on. This is one of the evidences as to say where the maximum will go to 15 days. And obviously this is due to menses. That's why they don't fast half of the month, or they don't pray half of the month, and so on. But inshallah we'll get to that as well. Okay, so the maximum period of purity between two menses is 15 days. I hope that's clear. Inshallah, next week I'll bring in a few scenarios which we'll understand much better. Because with regards to istihādah, this is where problems occur. Where, for example, a woman will bleed for 3 days, and then she won't see anything for 2 days, and then she's going to bleed for 1 day, and then she's not going to see anything for 4 days, and so on. What do they do? And there's categories to this which, inshallah, next week we'll discuss. And then he said, so rahimahullah, he says the youngest age for a woman to menstruate is 9 years. So any blood that they see before that is going to be classed as istihādah. Any blood they see before that will be classed as istihādah. Now the minimum of 9 years, these are 9 lunar years. Especially sisters have to be very careful with this. A lot of us do not even know or follow the Islamic calendar. Your days are calculated according to the Islamic calendar. Now someone might say, but what's the difference? Even if I follow the English calendar and so on. We know that the Islamic calendar is short by 10 days. Every year you'll see 10 days, go back 10 days. For example, you see Ramadan. Every year you see it go back 10 days. Because why? The lunar year is shorter than the solar calendar that they use now, the Gregorian calendar and so on. So we have to be very careful. Now, because a girl might have reached 9 lunar years, but they don't realize. And if they bleed, they might think, oh no, I'm not 9 years old yet. So, good question. I would have to look into that. If there's a specific number, how many months that would be. Oh yeah, I'll have to look into that, inshallah. Okay, so minimum age that a girl could experience menstruation is 9 years old. And of course, she's classed as an adult at that time for a woman. Yeah, she's classed as an adult at that time. And then pregnancy, which might come as a shock for some. Rahimahullah, he mentions that the least pregnancy, so the least duration for pregnancy that a woman can carry is 6 months. So obviously you have a lot of these births, what do they call them? Yeah, premature births. You see nowadays 7 months, it happens, 7.5 months. So the least, the Musannif he mentions, and to my knowledge, this is ijma', and according to all of the scholars, 6 months is the bare minimum. Yeah, and obviously if your wife gives birth, yani less than 6 months after you consummated the marriage, then you know there's a problem. Something happened, yeah, before you got married to them, and so on. You would know. Highly unlikely. Yeah, before 6 months, she cannot give birth. Yeah. Before 6 months, you can't. It won't even be a premature birth. But if they do give, say for example, they do give birth to like a full-on baby, less than 6 months after your marriage, then you know something happened. Yeah, and it wasn't with you, and you're not the father. Yeah, so that's the bare minimum. And then the most a woman can carry in terms of pregnancy, 4 years. Yeah, there are stories where a lot, I've heard myself where women have kept birth for like 2 years. So you're giving birth to a baby with teeth and hair and everything. Probably could walk by the time they come out. Yeah, so the maximum year is 4 years. But of course, we know the usual amount, the majority is 9 months. Normally, women give birth after 9 months, where the baby is fully developed and so on. So the womb has fully developed and so on. So inshallah, before we wrap up, I'll just touch on a few things of the next topic which the Musannif mentioned, and then next week inshallah we'll go deeper into them. So there are certain things which are forbidden. Okay, certain things which are forbidden for the woman or the junub. The junubi, the one in the state of janaba or in hayd and so on, they are forbidden from doing certain things. So here, rahimahullah, he mentions them, so, وَيَحْرُمُ, I'll read the Arabic and then inshallah we'll display. So, وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ ثَمَانِيَةُ أَشْيَاءَ الصَّلَاةُ وَالصَّوْمُ. Okay, let's we'll go through them, inshallah. So, he says, وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ ثَمَانِيَةُ أَشْيَاءَ. So, with regards to hayd and nifas, there are 8 things which are forbidden for women in these two cases. So women experiencing bleeding from hayd and nifas, they're forbidden from doing these 8 things. We'll just list them down inshallah for today, and then next week we'll touch on a bit of them. Some are controversial, some are not, and so on. Yeah, so he rahimahullah mentions number 1, as-salah, forbidden. For the one who is menstruating or is in nifas, they, remember when we say it's forbidden, meaning that even if they wanted to pray, they cannot pray. Okay, even if they wanted to pray, they cannot pray. And if they do pray, they are sinful. Naam, khair. Number 2 is as-sawm. They're not allowed to fast. Forbidden for them to fast. And if they do fast, their fast is invalid. They've just stayed hungry. Number 3, وَقِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ. Reading the Qur'an. We'll touch on that inshallah next week. This is a very controversial one, I can say right now, even though the majority of the ulama are of this opinion, that is la yajuzu reciting Quran. We'll touch more on that next week inshallah, and what qira'ah is and so on. Number 4, touching and carrying the Quran. If you're in this state, again, it is impermissible. It is haram for you to touch the Quran. And touching the Quran, meaning touching even verses which are written, for example, on a book, touching the place where there is the verse, it becomes haram. For example, I've got my notebook and I've attended class. I've written the evidence, which is a verse from the Quran. A menstruating woman would not be allowed to touch the line in which there is the verse of the Quran, but the rest of the book is okay. Yes, there's a difference of opinion with regards to reading the Quran, touching the Quran and so on. And inshallah next week we'll touch more on it with evidences. I knew we wouldn't have time, inshallah. And then next is وَدْخُولُ الْمَسْجِدِ. So entering the mosque is forbidden. Again, some might say no, there's exceptions to this and so on, and they'll quote the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, or you can perform everything that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her to the nearest meaning, that you could do everything that the person or the haji is doing except for doing sa'i and tawaf. Okay, but entering the mosque is forbidden for them, and inshallah we'll touch more on that as well next week as to why the ulama they mentioned this. Number 6, which you just mentioned, at-tawaf, there's clear-cut proof for that. One is that it's in the masjid, especially now, it's in the masjid. And number 2, at-tawaf is basically classed as prayer. When you go to obviously the haram, Tahiyat al-masjid is to do tawaf, isn't it? And then, okay, the last 3 I've got together here, the last 2. So, number 7 is wal-wati, wal-wat'u, intercourse with your wife during this period is haram for you and sinful. And enjoying, or the direct translation basically is taking pleasure from what is between the navel and the knee from your wife. Okay, so if your wife is in state of menstruation or she's on her period, and it is forbidden for you to take pleasure from what is in between the navel and the knees. Anything around that is all halal. Okay, anything around that is halal. Okay, khair, so someone just posted a thing, but nowadays, premature babies can survive earlier than that back in the days. Premature babies can survive earlier than back in the days. That could be very true due to the science that we have now and the technology that we have now, but a baby born before 6 months, trust me, it's not yours. Okay, so if you've just got married, for example, and within 6 months of that marriage or 5 months of that marriage, your wife gives birth, chances are very, very, very high that the baby is not yours.
Why should she give birth to the baby and the baby's like,
Yes.
premature, like
So if it's extremely premature and so on, it probably won't even be classed as a baby. It'll probably come out as a dead fetus. Yeah, if it comes out as a dead fetus, then it's not a baby, isn't it? So then, of course, the chances are very high that it was yours, but it wasn't fully developed and it passed away. And the fetus died. That's very true. But we're talking about premature babies that come out and they're healthy enough or they've developed enough to live. Very highly unlikely 6 months it can happen, or before 6 months. And someone asked the question, what if they pray thinking that they were off their menstrual cycle? Are they still sinful? That's a good question. Inshallah, we'll touch more on this question next week when it comes to istihada. So I'll take as a sister asked, what if a woman prays thinking that they're not on their menses, but then they find out that they are on the menses afterwards? Are they still sinful? No. Because of course this was out of ignorance, it wasn't intentional. They only become intentional if they perform salah knowingly, knowing they are on their menstrual period, but they still stand up and perform salah. Over here, la yajuzu, salah is not permissible, and we know that when something is haram, we gave the definition of haram to be that which one is rewarded for leaving out, and they are punished for doing. They are punished for doing. Naam. So, inshallah, yeah, we've come to Naam. Any question?
Going back to that topic of
Yeah.
the urine, you said where the urine is dried, it's difficult for you to spot where it is. And let's say there's an example of someone, I know you shouldn't stand and urinate.
Yeah.
You urinate.
Yes.
Inevitably, the drops are going to fall onto your clothes once you finish. So, is there a case of sprinkling water on that bit and you carry on?
No, that's a good point, or good question. We mentioned if someone has urine, regardless of how it's come onto you. So, say for example, you stood up, like you mentioned, splashbacks, or when you finish, you got some urine on yourself. If you know that you've got urine on your clothes, then it's dried up. It's not sufficient to just clean where you think that the urine is. You have to wash the full garment if you cannot see it. But if you know this is where the urine was, then it's sufficient for you to clean that area up, and then you can perform salah with it and so on. And obviously mainly for the guys, for the brothers and so on, if you do urinate standing up, you still can take extra care. Of course, say for example you've got tissue with you and so on, you could place tissue underneath your private parts and making sure that there's no splashbacks wherever you're urinating, and you clean yourself before, of course, putting your trousers back on and so on.
You know the term washing your clothes, in the modern day, would that have to be using a washing machine?
Good question. In the modern days, would washing your clothes be termed as putting in the washing machine? Not necessarily, no. Even if you're to take water by hand on a jug, as long as water flows on where that impurity was, and you can see that the impurity has been removed, then it's fine, it's clean. Because of course, they didn't have washing machines back in the days, isn't it? Yeah. So we've got one more question, inshallah, last question. So would the pregnant woman who sees blood stop praying according to our madhab? That's a very good question. Inshallah, with regards to this question as well, I'll touch more on it next week. Due to timing, I'll give the ikhtilafat and the difference of opinion and so on, and the final ruling with regards to this on our lesson next week, inshallah ta'ala. So khair, jazakumullahu khair for your patience at the beginning. We'll stop here inshallah next week, same time. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.